When two voices of nature collide, we're fighting fire.
That would be really annoying.
I'm in danger.
Fight! Let's go! Yeah. Great one, bigger number. Big explosion! Let's go! 305 bells!
Maybe if we took a moment.
Yo guys, what is up? Moxsy, Diablo 4 video, and today we are going over updated Plagueshifter. This is going to be the 3.0 version. Now, I know I've put out a few guides for Plagueshifter, and that's more so due to the build evolving as I get to different stages of the game. The 1.0 was kind of early game, 2.0 was that mid-late game, and now I swapped back to it at level 100, as I said I would, because I wanted to see how the build would fare against the hardest content, Nightmare 100, and it slaps. It's got great survivability, it's got great damage, and I've tweaked the build to adapt to Nightmare 100s to blast on it. I wanted to make this 3.0 version before I did the tier list. I know a lot of you are asking me to make a tier list of Druid builds, but I wanted to make sure that I play all the Druid builds at level 100 before I start ranking them. And so I'm so happy with the way that this build came out. The big changes, if you're going to ask what is happening for this 3.0 version, just as an overhead view, is we are not going to be using the Crone Staff. I will talk about that more in depth in a second. And we're also going to be adding the Bulwark damage mechanics into the build. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get on the Plagueshifter guide is that trample feels bad on controller. Trust me, I play on controller, I know. And now we're adding another damage ability. Earth and Bulwark is going to be hitting for 300 millions on this build, and we're no longer relying on trample for single target damage. Now tramples is more of a utility, more of a defensive and unstoppable source for us, and it's less of a damage source, and we're more going to be relying on Poison Creeper and Bulwark for our damage. Let's get into the full build guide. Hope you guys enjoy the video. So the very first thing I want to talk about is the barrier explosions. Now, if you've seen the Shred Explosion build, we're kind of mimicking that damage mechanic, but we're doing it on Plagueshifter. Now, I've said a few different things about Bulwark and its scaling, and I just want to really nail down a point. So the Bulwark has a barrier generation cap that is based off of your max life. If you are hitting the percentage of your max life as barrier, that is your cap. So there isn't like everyone is going to have a 60% cap. It depends on how much barrier points you put in. So if you have more points into barrier, you're going to need less barrier generation on your gear in order to make this work. And so depending on the amount of barrier generation that you're going to be getting on your gear is the amount of points that you want to fit in this. Right now, for example, my barrier at 4 out of 5 points is going to give me 63% barrier amount. And if we go to my character sheet and we go to my barrier bonuses, I'm at 68%. So if we do some quick math, I've got 63 times 1.68. That is giving me 105 barrier generation. So I'm just over cap on my current gear. I do have some min-maxing that I could do because I could get more barrier on my gear, and then I could get more vulnerable on my rings, which would be really nice. But right now, I'm sitting at just above cap, which is perfect for me. So depending on how many points you have in Bulwark, you don't want this number to go much above 100% of your barrier bonus. The next big thing that I mentioned is moving away from the Crone Staff. Now, I was messing around with the Crone Staff version of this build versus a non-Crone Staff version, both on Nightmare 100s, and I cleared a Nightmare 100 on both the Crone Staff variant and a non-Crone Staff variant. And depending on how you like to play the build is like what weapon I would recommend for you. So my big issue when I'm using the Crone Staff is the landslide damage gets completely overshadowed with Bulwark. We're losing 2 damage aspects, and my landslides just weren't really doing much damage anymore, and it just felt like I was using a little bit of a scuffed version of a Bulwark build with landslides thrown in. If we get rid of the Crone Staffs, then we can use damage aspects, we can focus on basic attack speed, and now all of a sudden our landslides are also contributing a ton to our damage. They're not going to hit as hard as Bulwark is, but it feels better to play that like a landslide playstyle, because obviously you don't want your landslides on a Plagueshifter Poison Creeper landslide build to feel like an afterthought. So that is why I'm moving away from it. When you put all of these aspects together, we get the best of the Earthen Bulwark setup, where we're incorporating barrier generation, but I've got it on my gear so that I've still got barrier generation max while not losing any survivability. We're still going to be using damage reduction while fortified. We get the movement of trample, and we're going to be able to get 2 sources of unstoppable for even more survivability. We've got poison creeper, which does those huge AoE nukes that you're seeing. We're going to be using petrify for crowd control. Storm strike is going to give us our vulnerable, our immobilize, and we're still using landslide with terror modes to destroy things. This is probably my build of the season. I really love this build. I will be ranking it quite highly on my tier list, as I think it's good for all stages of the game. Now let's get into the breakdown of all of our gear specifics. So to start us off, on our helmet, we're going to be using cooldown reduction, barrier gen, max life, and either armor or basic attack speed, with the aspect that your basic skills grant you damage reduction. This is really important. You're going to be basic attacking all the time. On our current setup, I no longer actually cast landslide. I am not clicking the landslide button. We don't need to anymore. You're going to basically be holding down your basic attack. So getting this augment for even more damage reduction when you're basic attacking is really nice. Next up, this is a new addition to the build. This is, I think, the glue that allows you to not use Crone Staff. Now, the biggest issue with survivability in Nightmare 100s is you need Bulwark up basically 100% of the time. That is going to give you survivability, and it's going to give you damage. And before I put this aspect on, I was losing Bulwark, and I was having those awkward moments where I just wouldn't have it. Now, with this aspect, Mending Stone, the duration of our Bulwark is going to be increased, and when we kill an enemy, we replenish it. This does not interfere with the explosions of Bulwark. From my testing, it's still going to give us the same amount of Bulwark nukes. We're still taking a lot of damage on Nightmare 100, so that Bulwark is getting depleted and exploding, but we're also going to be able to replenish it, which is really nice. Next up, I really need some better gloves. These are still my gloves that I used on our level 80 build video, but ranks of landslide, obviously super important. Lucky hit chance is great for this build. Crit chance is great. The willpower I would re-roll for earth crit damage. You can't get basic attack speed on your gloves. Storm skill cooldown not needed. So really the god roll is crit chance, lucky hit, landslide, and earth crit. Then on our pants, we've got damage reduction and armor. Those are the big things you're looking for. If you can get quad damage reduction, that's great. If you can get triple damage reduction plus armor, that's fantastic. And then I've got a not max roll disobedience, pretty close. These pants are going to give you a ton of survivability. I have the when you use a potion, you get your resource back. You can use a barrier one, which is also going to give you even more survivability with this build. Next up on our boots, these are pretty perfect god roll boots. I don't need the spirit cost reduction anymore, so I could technically roll those off to an off stat like intelligence or dexterity for a Paragon board. But movement speed, spirit cost, movement speed, and damage reduction while injured. And then while you have fortify, your earth skills gain +2 ranks. This is overcapping my barrier. I am not using this for the barrier damage because I don't need it. It's not actually benefiting my barrier. I just am still using this for the damage of our landslides. I still wanted to care about the damage that our landslides are dealing, and this improves our landslide damage by about 20%. Next up for our weapons, I've got a pretty mediocre weapon. It's 764. I could have a lot more damage here. The damage or item power of your weapon doesn't actually matter for Bulwark, so I'm not losing any damage there, but I am losing some damage on landslide by not having a high item power weapon. But this is pretty much my god roll. Crit damage, willpower, vulnerable, crit damage with earth skills. I would not wish for anything else. Note that we're not using aspects anymore. I'm now using the casting a storm skill, grants your earth skills, increase crit damage. Before on the Plagueshifter 2.0, I used the aspect that when you have fortify, your core skills deal more damage. Note that we're trying to scale all of our damage, and Earth and Bulwark is not a core skill. So that is why we're going to be using this aspect to give us more crit damage with those Earth and Bulwark explosions. And then we get to our amulet. I am no longer using trample slide on our amulet slot. It just feels not as important for Nightmare 100s. The damage from trample starts to fall off, and the importance of having Bulwark up 100% of the time becomes of utmost priority. And so we're moving the symbiotic aspect to our amulet to get as much cooldown as possible. Still, God Roll would apply, as in like +3 ranks of Envenom is the best thing that you can get. Once again, I don't need Spirit Cost anymore on this build. Cooldown, more armor, damage reduction, movement speed are all going to be really nice bonuses for you. And then we're going to be using the Inexorable Force Heart that pulls enemies towards you whenever you have an ultimate active. This is great grouping not only for Poison Creeper, but also Earth and Bulwark. Quick tip. If you are using your ultimate, do not trample into them. It's one of the biggest mistakes that I do when playing this build is I group up all the enemies nice and close for my Barber Heart explosions, for the Bulwark, for the Poison Creeper, and then I trample into them and they all get spread out, and then I get a bunch of like ads just kind of lingering around. So if you're going to do your ultimate, save your trample till after to maybe kill some stragglers. But I'm mainly using trample as a survivability tool, and it proccing all the landslides everywhere is pretty nice because it's a bunch of hits all at the same time to give us our lucky hits, to give us our resets. So I still like using the trample landslides. I've got that on my offhand right now. And then we've got Earth skills, deal more crit damage to crowd controlled enemies with the Brutal Heart. That's going to give us more damage suppression. We don't need the barrier generation. And then on your rings, the God Roll is crit chance vulnerable Earth crit. And then if you need the barrier, you can get the barrier. If you get barrier on your other pieces of gear, you don't need the barrier. It's all about finding a nice balance of barrier generation so that you're not overcapping that. And then we've got the Earth skills deal more crit damage, and the landslides hit twice with the Barber Heart. Barber Heart gives us so much extra damage with this build. I definitely recommend it. And that is going to do it for our gear. Lastly, the totem, basic skill, lucky hit, cooldown, fortify. I could get crit chance here, which would be nice. The crit chance doesn't really apply to your landslides. It's just for the bulwark. So if you can get more crit chance, that's always going to be really good. But the big thing here is the basic skill attack speed. This is a must-have on your totem if you are not going to be using the Crone Staff. For our Spirit Boons, we're going to be using Wariness. This is basically a must-have on any Druid build. And then we're actually going to go to swooping attacks for the attack speed. Attack speed is the survivability. The difference between you dying and living could be your percentage increase to attack speed. So make sure you are finding it where you can. We're grabbing Avian Wrath for the more crit damage. You could also grab more crit chance. That also works really well. Once again, the crit chance doesn't really matter for our landslides because we're getting Terra modes, but the crit damage is really nice for the explosions of our Earth and Bulwark. Then we're using Pack Leader. This is essential to reset Poison Creeper. It's why we have lucky hit chance on our gear, is to give more resets of Poison Creeper, and all of the trample landslides hitting everywhere and everything makes this proc more often, which is really, really great. And lastly, we're going to be going Calm Before the Storm so that we reset our ultimate. This gives us more uptime on Petrify, which is more uptime on our crit damage multipliers, more uptime on our CCs on enemy, and more efficient grouping of enemies in Nightmare Dungeons. That feels really good. I'm not using Cataclysm right now because this is a spec that is geared for Nightmare 100s, and Cataclysm is really nice for clearing Helltides and like Nightmare 80s and 90s, but for Nightmare 100s, I want the enemies to be stunned when I'm pulling them towards me. For our skill tree, I didn't really change much here. The probably big difference is I'm grabbing Heightened Senses for even more survivability. Whenever we shapeshift into our werebear, we're going to get 12% damage reduction against elites. Elites can be pretty scary on Nightmare 100, so just adding a little bit more survivability to the build there. But just a real quick overview, we're going to be using Storm Strike. It's going to make enemies vulnerable for us. This is another source of vulnerable outside of our exploit glyph, which is fantastic. We're going to be using Wild Impulses. This gives us more damage to our landslides. It does not impact Bulwark, but I wanted our landslides to deal a lot of damage on this build still, even though Bulwark is just like nuking things. So we're grabbing Wild Impulses. Don't really need the crit chance. Crit chance is nice for Bulwark, but the like landslides aren't going to really benefit from that at all. And like Iron Fur, I think would be really nice to grab. We just don't really have these skill points. So we've got 4 points into Bulwark, give us our explosions. If you get more barrier generation than I have currently, you could take points out of Bulwark and like ideally rock 1, and then you could put more into crit chance here, or you could put more points into Iron Fur. With my specific build, and why I wanted to explain the barrier generation is because it is going to be on a scale. If you have more barrier generation, you don't need as many points into Earth and Bulwark. How I have my gear currently, I kind of need these 4 points there. Then we're going to go into Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper is going to give us our Poison and Venom multiplier, and we want that to be up as often as possible. So more duration is going to be really important. We don't need the crit chance. That is going to give us our Envenom multiplier, which is still a multiplicative damage increase, even though it says plus. It's just a typo right now. We are not casting our our actual landslides anymore, so we don't need spirit from trample. We're going to be going more into fortify. If you are still like early in the game and leveling, obviously the spirit can be really nice, but once you're at the point that I'm at, you just don't need spirit generation anymore. We're capping out everything here, crushing earth, more damage while we have fortify, and our crit strikes with our earth skills are going to fortify us for our base life. And then we're grabbing petrify. Once again, we do not need more spirit, so we can save ourselves a point here. I've only got 2 points in natural disaster, just kind of like squeezing the build. But resonance, really important. Defiance, really important. Circle of life, we're not going to be actually like really casting landslide, so we're not going to be benefiting from this. You could put 1 point here if you plan on casting landslide. I just don't think it's quite necessary. And then quick shift to heightened senses and our nature's fury. And lastly, for my Paragon board, real quick, because I've seen a lot of people actually get confused about this, and I didn't realize that this was an issue. On dpscheck.gg, I have my Paragon board. It is always going to be a hyperlink in yellow, and a lot of people were telling me that I never included my Paragon board for a lot of my builds, and just weren't clicking this little yellow thing. So I'm going to be adding like a little note that says hyperlink, click the yellow, just because these will always lead you to my like Paragon boards for my builds, and I apologize that wasn't more obvious, so I am trying to make that a little bit better. And now let's get into my actual Paragon board. So this was the old Paragon board. It was pretty solid. We were grabbing a lot of like legendary nodes to make up for our low glyph levels. However, this board is inefficient now for level 100, mainly because I now have all max level glyphs, and this board for Plagueshifter 1.0, which is what we're looking at right now, only had 5 glyphs. So we're going to be getting rid of a lot of the inefficiencies. For example, this section right here, where we were grabbing height and malice, and then like doing this long traverse, was just pretty inefficient use of points. And we're going to be grabbing more attack speed nodes. We're going to be grabbing even more armor than we were before. I did have a lot of health and armor things, but we're getting even more before. Inefficiencies like this, we're no longer going to be grabbing shape-shifting skills damage because we're just not caring about trample damage. We're not going to be grabbing survival instincts because we just don't care about this multiplier. And overall, it's just going to be a more efficient board. Showing on screen is the Plagueshifter 3.0 board. As you can see, we are being now very efficient with our point use. There is not a single wasted point on this whole board. I've sat here for like an hour now just tweaking around with things. So as you can see, this heightened malice board, we're now positioning the board so that we can grab all of the good stuff. We can get height and malice, and we can grab our core glyph here, but we're skipping all of the inefficiency in the middle. We're grabbing attack speed. This is a new thing that I wanted to fit into the build because we are now really prioritizing attack speed on this build. We've got all of the armor nodes that we could possibly grab. We've got armor while in werebear form, damage reduction. We've got armor here, max life, more damage while healthy, more armor, more armor. You get the node damage reduction from poisoned enemies, more damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, as much damage reduction and survivability as we can, because trust me, this build does enough damage. Now, for the glyphs that we're going to be using, it's going to be the exploit glyph to give us that vulnerable damage and free vulnerable procs. Undaunted for the damage reduction while fortified and damage while we have fortify. Spirit's going to give us our crit strike damage multiplier and a new multiplier whenever we critically strike enemies. The shapeshifter glyph here is for the bulwark skill. When you trample, you're going to turn into a bear and you're going to stay in a bear form for a few seconds. Make sure you're hitting your bulwark button when you're doing that, because that's going to shapeshift you into human form, and you're going to want to be hitting your bulwark button whenever you are in your trample or while you're a bear. That's going to give you a 20% crit multiplier, or sorry, crit chance base for bulwark, which is going to basically, with the amount of crit chance that we're getting, give us a 60% crit chance for bulwark, which is fantastic. It's always going to be critting. Territorial is going to give us our increased damage to close targets and more damage reduction against close targets. And then earth and sky is going to give us another 10% damage multiplier for our nature magic skills. This is for our both our like landslides and our bulwark, and it's going to give us the bonus to magic nodes. I'm using that here to get bonus to our damage to poisoned enemies and our damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. is where the earth and sky glyph is going to go. I've done this in a lot of boards. I really like positioning these like bonus to magic nodes in this spot because we genuinely care about all these blue things versus where on a lot of other boards we just don't really care about the other blue nodes. For a walkthrough of our Paragon board, our starting board, we're going to be putting the exploit glyph. Here is a good view of the starting board. Then we're coming up into the Earth and Devastation board, grabbing our damage to crowd controlled, crit damage to crowd controlled enemies, our Earth skill damage, and this is where I have the Undaunted glyph, which is going to be getting intelligence. Then we're going to go over to the right, grab our armor, which is going to be really nice for us. And then this is the bottom part of the Heightened Malice board. This is where we have the Earth and Sky glyph. Coming up from the top of the Earth and Devastation board, we are going to be going into the Survival Instincts board. This is where I have my Spirit glyph. On our way there, we're going to get more damage while healthy and more armor. We're also grabbing more armor while in Werebear form, more damage reduction while fortified. And then we're on our left here. This is where we're going to be going into the Survival or the Inner Beast board. We're grabbing more armor, more max life. We're grabbing those attack speed nodes, getting more armor for the build. And this is where I have the Territorial glyph. This is going to give us our damage reduction from close enemies. And then to the left here, once we go down from the damage reduction while fortified, this is where we're going into the Thunderstruck board. Thunderstruck, I know we're not using storm skills, but it's got this awesome node here that's going to give us more crit damage, and it's got more crit damage nodes, which is really nice. I would love to be able to grab both of these crit damage nodes. Just couldn't really swing it with like how min-maxed this board is right now. And then we're going down to the Heightened Malice to get the while 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby, you deal 45% increased damage. And that is going to be the Paragon board. Once again, you can find this full thing if you want to copy it on dpscheck.gg. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. This has been one of my favorite builds to work on this season, and I'm so glad that not only was it good for leveling, but it can also blast Nightmare 100 dungeons. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, it really does help me out. We're getting so close to 300,000 subscribers. And with that, guys, I'll catch y'all on the next one. Take care. Peace.